Star Trek is all about anti-capitalism, and that is why one villain works so well. Few science fiction franchises have wrestled with the idea of economics, greed, and the human spirit like Star Trek. At its core, Star Trek has always been a bold, utopian thought experiment, a vision of humanity that has evolved beyond money, inequality, and exploitation. From the very first episode of the original series, Gene Roddenberry's future promised a post-scarcity society where people work not for profit, but for purpose. Humanity's great project wasn't to accumulate wealth, but to explore, understand, and grow. And yet, across the decades of Star Trek television and films, one of its most enduring and fascinating villains is built entirely around the opposite ideal. Greed, commerce, and self-interest define the Ferengi, a species that serves as a perfect foil to the Federation's socialist utopia. But among all of them, one Ferengi stands out as the villain who embodies why Star Trek's anti-capitalist philosophy matters so deeply: Grand Nagus Zek. Zek, the conniving, cackling head of the Ferengi Alliance introduced in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, isn't just a comic antagonist or political oddity. He's the mirror that reflects humanity's capitalist past, and the living proof of how Star Trek's core moral message thrives when it faces the ideologies it rejects head-on. The Federation's economic ideal, beyond money. Before diving into Zek's brilliance, it's worth revisiting what Star Trek actually stands for economically. The Federation is a society without traditional currency. Replicators eliminate scarcity, automation provides abundance, and individuals pursue what they find meaningful rather than what pays best. In Star Trek First Contact, Captain Picard put it plainly: greater than the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in our lives. We work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. This line, often quoted and sometimes mocked, captures Star Trek's central ethos: a world that has achieved the impossible, equality without need, cooperation without coercion. It's a future built on shared purpose rather than private profit. But such a world doesn't make for constant dramatic tension. It's difficult to tell gripping stories about people who have transcended greed. That's why Star Trek often turns outward, to explore alien cultures that still struggle with the flaws humanity overcame. The Klingons teach lessons about honor. The Romulans expose the dangers of secrecy and authoritarianism. And the Ferengi? They embody capitalism itself. Enter the Ferengi, capitalism in space. When the Ferengi were first introduced in The Next Generation, they were envisioned as the franchise's new major villains: greedy, violent, and obsessed with profit. That didn't quite work out. Their first appearance in The Last Outpost was awkward, almost cartoonish. The show's writers soon realized that the Ferengi worked far better as satire than as menace. It was Deep Space Nine that perfected them. By turning Ferengi culture into a full-blown capitalist caricature, the series found both humor and depth. Their society revolves around the rules of acquisition, a sacred text of profit-driven commandments that parody corporate ethics and religious dogma alike. Ferengi philosophy is brutally simple: everything and everyone has a price. Business is war, and greed is not just good, it's divine. Every Ferengi business transaction is a holy act, Quark once said, echoing the voice of 1,000 Wall Street brokers. This made the Ferengi a fascinating recurring mirror to the Federation. On Deep Space Nine, a show already darker and more morally complex than The Next Generation, the Ferengi served as constant reminders of what humanity used to be, and what it could become again if it ever forgot its values. Zek, the ultimate capitalist, Grand Nagus Zek, played with gleeful absurdity by Wallace Shawn, is everything Star Trek stands against, and that's exactly why he works so well. He's not evil in the traditional sense. He doesn't conquer planets or wage war. Instead, his weapon is profit. His entire empire is built on greed, manipulation, and corruption. Zek is the spiritual heir to every corporate titan and political dealmaker who believes that self-interest drives progress. In many ways, he's capitalism personified, not the shiny, idealized capitalism of marketing slogans, but the sly, exploitative version that thrives on loopholes and moral blind spots. When Zek visits Deep Space Nine, he's treated as a mix between a monarch, a mob boss, and a circus act. His whispering voice, mischievous grin, and constant scheming turn every appearance into a lesson in avarice. But behind the comedy, Deep Space Nine uses him to ask a deeper question. What happens to a society that worships profit above all else? The answer, as Zek's rule often shows, is chaos disguised as order. Ferengi culture runs on exploitation, from labor practices to gender inequality. Women aren't even allowed to earn profit until Zek himself begins to question that tradition in one of the show's most surprisingly progressive storylines. The transformation of a capitalist icon. What makes Zek so compelling isn't that he's a caricature, it's that he evolves. Across several seasons, Deep Space Nine turns him from a ruthless profiteer into something far more nuanced, a capitalist who begins to question capitalism itself. In the episode Profit Motive, Zek attempts to apply the wisdom of the Bajoran prophets to his own financial strategies. The result is unintentionally revolutionary. He becomes enlightened, returning to Ferengina with a new philosophy, one that values generosity over greed. The reaction? Outrage. The Ferengi elite treat Zek's new ideals as heresy. Profit, after all, is their religion. His attempts to reform Ferengi society nearly destroy his reputation. Yet Star Trek plays this arc as more than comedy. Zek's journey mirrors humanity's own potential, the ability to evolve beyond the systems that once defined us. In the end, Zek retires, leaving behind a world slowly beginning to change. His successor, Rom, a once timid engineer who believes in fairness and compassion, becomes the new Grand Nagus. It's a poetic conclusion. The most capitalist species in Star Trek begins to embrace socialism. Anti-capitalism as Star Trek's moral core. Zek's story is more than just character development. It's a microcosm of Star Trek's political heart. The franchise has always framed capitalism as a stage of moral adolescence. It's not evil by design, but it's something to outgrow. The Federation doesn't punish those who trade or accumulate wealth. It simply doesn't need them. In the world of Star Trek, material abundance renders greed irrelevant. Progress is measured not by GDP, but by enlightenment. That's why Zek, and the Ferengi at large, are so valuable to the franchise. They remind the audience of how radical Star Trek's vision truly is. In an era where science fiction often doubles down on dystopia, Star Trek dares to say, we can be better. Not by building bigger corporations or stronger militaries, but by choosing compassion over competition. The Ferengi mirror what humanity still faces. It's tempting to view the Ferengi as a simple parody, but Deep Space Nine's writers knew better. The Ferengi reflect the worst instincts of humanity's present: greed, inequality, and the commodification of everything from labor to love. Quark, Zek's protege and frequent foil, sums it up best in one of his most reflective moments. Greater than, you know what the trouble is? The trouble is Earth. On Earth, there's no poverty, no crime, no war. You know why? Because they've given up. They've given up greed. That line